What's up, y'all? Today we're going to talk about what does the Bible say about Catholicism? But less importantly, what do I believe about Catholicism? So, first of all, I'm Protestant, so I'm not Catholic, so that's important to know where I'm coming from. And also, if you'd like to learn more about Catholicism from a Catholic viewpoint, I'd recommend checking out Pints with Aquinas, hosted by Matt Frad, and Council of Trent, hosted by Trent Horn. Those are two excellent podcasts and YouTube channels that I'd absolutely recommend. All right, let's jump right in. So first of all, what are some points that evangelical Protestants and Catholics disagree on? Well, first of all, the Eucharist. That is the body and blood of Christ. Catholics believe that it transforms into the literal body and blood of Christ, whereas as Protestants, there are two views held. One view held by Protestants is the memorial view, meaning that the bread and wine is just a representation. It has nothing. There's nothing spiritual though taking place. It's just a memorial. And the second view held by Protestants is consubstantiation, which is that the bread and wine remain just that, the bread and wine, but the body and blood are present. And I personally lean more on the memorial view, I must say. But I understand both of them. And another area that, of course, Protestants and Catholics disagree on, probably the most famous, is Mariology, the veneration of Mary. And it's important to understand because a lot of Protestants paint this as that Catholics worship Mary, which is absolutely not true. And you can point to examples of bad theology in Catholicism or of Catholics who do worship the saints, but that's not what the Catholic Church actually believes. So we got to be careful when discussing other worldviews and other religions, not to take them out of context. But the Pope just recently actually released a statement, or the Vatican rather, that no, we do not worship Mary, we venerate Mary. So that's important. But still, Protestants do not venerate the saints or Mary, and that's one of the main differences. Now, I personally, since I lean very Protestant, I don't venerate the saints. But, likewise, I see why some Catholics do. Because, as I heard a Catholic friar explain, that Protestants, our church, is we just see Christ, and that's all. Whereas a Catholic church has all the decorations and stuff and Christ, but they're not taken away from him, they are adding to Christ, and I see that. And that's why you need to be careful, though, because what is veneration? What is the difference between veneration and worship? There's a very close line that a lot of people step over, but that's really I would say Mariology is one of the biggest differences in the Catholic faith. And baby baptism. Catholics are for it and believe something happens to the baby, and that a lot of Catholics believe that the sins are washed away, in a sense, with that. And of course it can sin after that. But most Protestants don't, of course, hold this view. But I'm not sure if I believe in baby baptism, if that's the right word, but I see. Like, it makes sense to me. And I'm going to explain my reasons. Because, first of all, why couldn't God grant babies a clean slate when they are baptized? Because it makes sense that because their parents are Christian, that when they give this baby to God, which is what baptism is, in a sense, that God gives them the blessing of purifying this child. It makes sense to me. And yeah, comment and tell me what you think about this. And then, the second reason that I think this is a very interesting view is because most of the church fathers held this view. Also, one of my favorite pastors of all time believed in this, of course, R.C. Sproul. And so that's an interesting point, too. Another thing that Catholics and Protestants disagree on which kind of helped start the Reformation, was papal infallibility. What does papal infallibility mean? Does it mean that the Pope is infallible on every single issue? No. What the Catholics mean when they say papal infallibility is they mean that the Pope is infallible on certain issues. And it's a very complicated thing because you can use this and obviously say, well, that's kind of jumping around, and well, maybe the Pope's not infallible on this, and maybe, but you'll have to read more about that and you'll have to look at their official stance, because I've heard different Catholics say different things on this. But yeah, the Pope is only infallible on certain issues, is what the Vatican says. But, of course, as Protestants, we don't believe that. We believe that no man is infallible. And one thing that Catholics point to often is that Protestants disagree, and there's so many different denominations because there's no Pope. But that's not true. If you look at Catholic history, it's anything but consistent. Catholics have changed their views, have transformed their views. There's been so many schisms in the Catholic Church. Like, it is a very evolving faith. So to say that Protestant faith is changing because there is no Pope is a ridiculous statement, because the Catholic faith is changing with a Pope. Another area that Protestants and Catholics disagree about, of course, is purgatory. And it's mentioned, I believe, in 2nd Maccabees, which is, of course, in the Apocrypha or in the Catholic Bible. But one thing about that I find interesting is the fact that a lot of the early church believed in it. And I'm not saying that the early church is infallible or that the early church is always right. No, obviously not. But in the same extent, if you look at guys like Polycarp that were discipled by the Apostle John, does it not make sense that their theology would be better than our theology 2,000 years after the fact? And with purgatory, if you look in Revelations, it mentions a few times saints under the altar and stuff like this that seems to indicate that they aren't in heaven yet, but that they're not buried in earth either. Which, where are they? And it's something interesting to think about. This podcast, I'm hoping there'll be lots of comments, because I really want to hear what you think about it. Because I'm just learning about all this stuff, and I just kind of want to learn about it with you, is what this podcast is going to be about. Not really fully telling you what to think. I just want to learn with you, is what the goal of this podcast is going to be. But yeah, it's something I struggle with, because Catholicism does seem to be what most of the early church believed. And of course not called Catholicism, but most of the beliefs. And I find it very interesting. Another thing that Protestants and Catholics disagree about is Peter being the first pope. Because they say when he was handed the keys to the kingdom, that means that he became the first pope. And this is also where they get papal infallibility from, because when Jesus blessed Peter's mouth, they say, well, if Jesus blessed his mouth with wisdom, or whatever it says, that means he's infallible. Well, no. And I want to point you back to Solomon, because he prayed and asked the Lord for wisdom, and the Lord blessed him with wisdom. But if you look at the end of Solomon's life, he was definitely not infallible. He found a sin. And so I don't think we can use the Lord's blessing someone as a sign that they're infallible. I think that's ridiculous, because if you do that, you have to look at all the other people that God blessed. And I wouldn't say that they're infallible. Their writings, like if the books of the Bible, are infallible, of course, but not necessarily the people mentioned in the Bible are infallible, right? And so I think it's scary if you take one verse and use it in a certain way, but not do that with other verses. I think it's also important to understand, like, when you do that, then you've got to do that with the rest of the Bible as well, which kind of doesn't make sense. if you say that when Jesus or God blesses someone, that they're infallible, then you'll have to look at a lot of other cases of infallible people who you can tell are not infallible, right? So we need to be careful about this. Another thing I will say, to the Catholics' credit, is G.K. Chesterton was Catholic, and he is the greatest author I have ever read. So, they do have that for their cause. But also Aquinas, which is pretty good too. But yeah, like I said, I really want to learn with you guys. I'm not trying to teach you. Well, I am, but I also want to learn with you. So you'll have to comment, tell me what you think. This is an interesting topic. I really want to dig deeper into it. What do you believe about Catholicism? It's an interesting discussion. Well, it's a 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get around here and go, can't go. Oh, we're live. Sorry about that. I just also, some other things I want to mention, which is why we're having a second segment, because I want to mention things, okay? That's the worst. Okay. I'm in a new studio, which is fantastic. You'll have to go on YouTube. That's another reason to go on YouTube, so you can check out my fantastic studio. It's epic. But I want to talk about greatest hymns. Now, I think this is important because kind of goes along with the discussion. Not at all, but that's okay. But if you look at the traditional hymns, they're so theologically rich and important. Honestly, if you want to be inspired, read old hymns. They're fantastic. And by old, just so you know, to Gen Z, old means like it happened like 20 years ago. That's not actually what I mean by old. I mean like 1800s and stuff. That's what I mean by old. But just clarifying, because there might be just one Gen Z person who listens to this podcast. But hymns are so gratifying if you read them, and they're so theologically rich. The good ones. You can also like read heretical hymns, which you shouldn't do. Like, I'm not gonna call anyone out though. Hillsong. oh boy, something caught in my throat there. But like, you need to listen to hymns. I would recommend it, absolutely. And now I'm kind of rambling, but let's get back to the topic. Hymns. If you want to start reading hymns, I would totally recommend it. If you could get a hymn book and just read them in your daily life, almost as a morning devotional or whatever, the daily devotional, because it's just so, it fills you, it encourages you. I think it's absolutely a great idea. And what hymn should you start with? My favorite hymn is I'd Rather Have Jesus, which just completely sort of related side note, kind of. The music was written by George Beverly Shea. He was the singer for the Billy Graham revivals. Anyway, since you wanted to know that, I'm really good at staying on track. In case you're wondering. Oh boy. And other hymns that are really inspiring too, of course, are Amazing Grace. If you read it, it's so good. And yes, it's so overused, and so many non-Christians sing it. And when you listen to them singing, it's like, if you listen to these words, it's so convicting that I don't know how they sing it. And then other hymns that I'd recommend would not be Softly and Tenderly. It's kind of heretical. And I would recommend How Great Thou Art, theologically rich. Comment and tell me what are some of your favorite hymns and which hymns you think are most theologically rich. Anyway, yeah, that was just a little side note that I wanted to add. And this has been kind of a rambly segment, but you're going to have to forgive me. But, yeah. Okay, also, since we're on the topic, this is one of the greatest segues you've ever heard. Since we're on the topic, let's talk about topics. I need you guys to comment and tell me what episodes I should do. Like, what should my next episodes be about? I mean, obviously, this Like, I'm fantastic at choosing themes and topics and everything, but this podcast is for you guys. You're the judge. Like, literally, like your bidding is what I do. I'm here to work for you. Okay. Okay. So tell me what I need to talk about, and I'll talk about it. Okay. And if you'd like a part 2 that goes into a lot more deeper about Catholicism, I'd love to do that. This one wasn't meant to be deep, it was just to get the conversation going. And also, yeah, I need you to comment, okay? Comment, like, subscribe, and share with all your friends. Also, make sure you go to the YouTube channel and subscribe, like, comment, and share with all your friends. Okay, this has been the Talkology Show, episode 4. It's been fantastic to hang out with y'all, and I can't wait for the next episode to do it some more. See y'all.